The Instructor podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.
Welcome to the Instructor podcast. As always, I am your splendid host, Terry Cook, and I'm delighted to be here, and even more delighted that you have chosen to listen. If you have listened before, you'll be familiar with the show, but if you haven't, if this is your first time checking out the Instructor podcast, this is a show where I speak to leaders, experts, innovators, and game changers to look at ways that we can improve your driving school and potentially make you an even more awesome driving instructor. And that's what we're doing today. We've got a very unique episode today. It's an episode that's been requested a few times over the last 12 months or so, and I've always struggled to format it. I am basically recording today with two of my former pupils. We've got Charlotte, who actually appeared back on season 3, and we've got Julia, who you can find on another podcast I do called Driving Test Tales. And they're sharing their experience of learning to drive and offering some advice on potentially what I and what we as instructors can do better and what learners find important. And as I said, this is it's been something that's been requested a few times, and I've struggled to format it. But thankfully, these two are awesome, and they give some real insights and some real gems of wisdom in this. So definitely check out both of these interviews, and yeah, take note of some of the stuff they say, because it's really fascinating at certain points. But just before we dive into the show, I do just want to mention that is the awards season, and the Instructor podcast is up for awards with both the Intelligent Instructor and Go Roadie. And if you could spare a moment to go and vote for us, I would really appreciate it. Now, you can find links for this in the show notes, or you can go to the websites for Go Roadie or Intelligent Instructor, and you can vote over there. Now, if you do not think that the Instructor podcast deserves an award, that's completely fine. In which case, I would love it if you could tell me why. Drop me a message, tell me what you don't think is very good about this show, and I'll look to improve it. Alternatively, you can vote, but what I would really like you to do is vote regardless, whether that's voting for me or someone else or whatever. Show your appreciation to the people that are out there doing this stuff to help you. I'm a big believer in that, and go and show your appreciation by voting in the awards, but especially for the Instructor podcast. Speaking of showing your appreciation, if you hang about to the end of the episode, you will get to hear someone showing their appreciation. You know full well that I like to read out one of my reviews at the end of the show, and today I've got a negative review for you. I'm going to read out a negative comment that recently appeared on my Facebook post. So if you hang about to the end, you will see that it's not just the sunshine and rainbow reviews that I read, is also a negative one. So hang back to the end of the show and you can see if you agree with this negative comment. But for now, well, let's get stuck in. And now making a second appearance on the Instructor podcast, former pupil of mine, Charlotte Parker. How are we doing, Charlotte?
Hi, I'm so pleased to be back. I feel like a little mini celebrity.
Mini celebrity. Well, there's the thing. If right back at the start of 2021, was one of your goals for this year to become a regular on a driving instructor podcast?
You know what? It wasn't, but it should have been. It would have been to tick off.
I mean, it's slightly surreal in a way when you think about it, but yeah, no, I do appreciate you coming back. And this is an episode that has been requested a few times for a while by different listeners, the Pupil's Perspective. And when I put it out there that I was going to do it, you were someone that was recommended a couple of times, going back to the episode you did on social media. And I didn't tell you this, but it's actually one of my most downloaded episodes ever. And until recently, when the DVSA come on, it had the highest first day downloads. So yes,
my ego is now massive.
Yes. So not a mini celebrity, medium celebrity, you might say.
I might qualify for Jungle next year.
Well, anyone can qualify for Jungle. All right, but back to what we're doing today. So we're looking at the pupil's perspective and how you found learning and that. And I'm just going to put a caveat in to begin with, which is feel free to say anything that you weren't happy with during our lessons. I will not take offense, but I will edit it. But I do want to start off with the question of your overall learning experience, and not necessarily how you found me or the other instructor you had or anything like that, but kind of just your overall experience learning to drive, how you found it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So like most people, when I turned 17, I thought, this is it. I'm going to learn to drive. It's going to be great. I'm going to go to McDonald's and drive to sixth form. I started learning to drive that year, and then I ran out of money. Basically, I had the choice between learning to drive more or going on holiday. And I'm someone who loves travel, so I chose the holiday. I then didn't come back to learning to drive until the end of 2020, I think. I was finishing uni the following year. I just decided, okay, now it is time to do this. So it took me probably a little bit longer than most students do in the overall arc of learning to drive. I'd built up in my head that it was going to be a really unenjoyable experience and something that you just do it because everyone learns to drive. And I guess some lessons did feel like that when they're frustrating and you don't feel like you're making progress. But overall, I really like learning to drive. And it's still, when I drive my own car now, I still think back to like, how cool is it that I couldn't do this before? And now I can. And I'm so grateful for that. Of like, it's a life skill, isn't it? Like, I think overall, learning to drive turned out better than I expected it to be.
Awesome. I mean, just thinking back to when you first started with me, I think you were one of the people that had like 1 or 2 lessons with me before COVID, and then COVID hit. In fact, if I remember rightly with you, I think you literally paid for like 20 hours, something like that. And then 3 days later, we got told. But the pleasing thing there was you stayed with me, and it would have been easy to say, oh, can I have a refund? And then because you'd ask for a refund, then when it comes back to lessons, you'd have been like, oh, well, I can't go back to Terry because I've asked for this refund. But, I think just in those first couple of lessons, we built up a nice little rapport. So that was all good. In fact, I will ask you about that briefly. Obviously, you've nothing to compare it to, but how do you think that having COVID impacted your learning to drive? Not having COVID, during COVID.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one. Like I said, I was a student in university at the time as well. So my whole learning ability in terms of learning to drive, studying for a degree completely changed. There was a lot of soft skills that people learned around that. So online communication was a big one. Like before, I don't know what driving instructors were like, but pretty much all messaging on Facebook Messenger was what we were using. For me, it was just another thing that you had to overcome. Like you say, I don't have anything to compare it to, but I'm Gen Z. I'm on number 4 of my lifetime so far. So yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Okay. But one thing that did work in your favour over COVID was you were doing private practice. Now, if I remember rightly, during the first period of COVID, you couldn't do private practice, but other bits, I can't remember how it all worked out, but you were doing private practice. So I'm keen to ask you about that. What were the benefits and possibly the negatives that you found to doing private practice?
Yeah, so I bought myself my first car for my 21st birthday. I'd accepted that no one was going to surprise me with a car, so I bought myself one. It's still the car that I drive now. I absolutely love it. Private practice for me felt essential. I was in a really privileged position that I had a job while studying, so I was able to save money alongside that, which I then was able to put obviously into learning to drive, but also private practice too. My partner was the one who actually sat with me, which was a positive because obviously I've got a good relationship with him. I can communicate with him. But it's also a negative because he could already drive, but he wasn't that many years removed from learning to drive. So he still had thoughts in his mind about how he was taught to drive and what I should do in that sense. But obviously he's not an instructor. So I'd sometimes say, oh, this is how I've been doing it in my practice. And then he would be like, oh, but you could do it like this. That's how I did it. And then that would be 2 conflicting ways of doing it. And when you're first learning to drive, that's not always ideal because it's a bit overwhelming for a new driver to be told 3 different ways to do a hill start when they can't even do one properly.
No, but I mean, that's interesting because I'd not looked at it that way before, but you then go on and find your own way of doing it. That's kind of an amalgamation of everything you've been taught. And, a lot of the time what goes on in the car, there isn't necessarily a right or wrong. They're just subtle differences. And thinking back, I think the way that you handled the private practice I thought was really good because, I can remember getting messages at random times, I've just been doing this hill start, Terry, got stuck on the hill. What advice would you give? Or you describe where you were. Is that something that you felt was important, and maybe to obviously the instructors that were listening, would you recommend that they keep open for their students so they can communicate about that private practice?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, I don't know if we've mentioned it before we were recording or just as we've started, but building up a good rapport with your students in the first few weeks of learning to drive with them is so key for the future relationship, because that's what it is essentially. Like, if you're a driving instructor, it's a people skill that you're selling as well. And knowing that if I was out and I got to a junction and I just had no idea why I'd done it wrong, or someone had beeped me on a roundabout when I thought I was doing it really well, and then being able to message you about that in the evening, sometimes quite late at night, because my private practice was normally after dark when the roads were quieter. But it was really nice that I knew that you weren't going to be, I don't know, maybe annoyed that I was practicing and not with you, because I suppose there's the risk that you could have seen that as money that you were missing out on, or as an instructor, it's money that you're missing out on. But ultimately, it meant that when I came to a lesson and we'd had that chat sort of in between about something that maybe had gone right or gone wrong, we then had like a ground point to start that lesson on. So it wasn't like we were coming in from exactly where we left off the week before. There was sort of an up-to-date talk about what I've been doing in my own car.
I mean, yeah, just on that point, it is theoretically money that I would have gained from you. But the flip side of that is that you didn't need as many hours with me. So therefore, I would be able to take on a different student once you'd passed. So from my perspective, there's never an issue around there about private practice. In fact, it makes my job easier, because I think we did this a little bit actually, where we would practice something for the first time, then you would go and practice that in your car. So then when you came back to the lesson, they were like, oh yeah, you're actually really good at this now, right, next. But I think you touched on it then. That's one of the things we did in lessons as well. We'd always start off the lesson with a reflection on any driving you've done. And I think we used to finish with almost like a little plan or an idea of what you might do for the week. And it was never set in stone, because you might not have been able to drive or whatever. But do you think that was something that benefited you as well, just spending a bit of time on lessons and not feeling like your lesson had to be just driving for the solid 2 hours or whatever it was?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can really understand that if students aren't private, like don't have access to private cars and whatever, that they would probably want to drive for that full 2 hours just to make sure they're really maximizing every bit of the money that they're spending, because learning to drive is expensive. I get it. But equally for me, I'm quite a reflective person in my own life, and I quite often need to look back on situations to understand, okay, I feel really nervous. For me, it was hill starts. I've never liked hill starts, even in my car now, I don't love it. But for me, hill starts was a big thing. So I always needed to reflect, okay, why did that hill start go wrong? What do I need to do differently? Even if it's something really minor, talking about that in the lesson made, firstly, you share your problems. It's easier for an instructor to help you with them, but also mentally for yourself. You're not building this up as this thing that, okay, I can't do hill start, so I'm never going to be able to do a hill start.
It's interesting you say that as well, because I can remember on our lessons, you would just be telling me how you struggled with hill starts, and not just in your car, but in my car. And then you just would do 7 in a row and you'd just knock them all out of park. And it was never that you couldn't do them. It was just that you didn't like them.
Yeah.
And I think that repetition worked for you. But I think just touching back on the other thing you said there about the reflecting and the talking through stuff, there are a lot of instructors that are worried that having a discussion about or a conversation with a student isn't a good thing. What would your take on that be? Because it wasn't just reflecting on the stuff you'd done in private practice. We would pull up and we'd have conversations about whatever it was we were talking about. What would your take on that be?
My take on that is that if you're doing like the 2-hour block lessons with someone, that's a lot of time to be spending in quite a small space. Like, most people learn to drive in relatively small cars. I don't know anyone who's learning in a limo, but you're close to your instructor, you're like physically. And if you've not got the ability to talk to each other about driving first and foremost, but other things that are going on. I think once, Terry, you said to me something about that you felt like a bit of a counsellor at the wheel as well, which is so true, because when you're driving, you do just talk. So you have to be able to have that relationship. And for some people, they won't want that, and that's fine. But for me, I'm a talker. That's why I'm back for another podcast episode. So I really needed to have an instructor that would listen to me and understand what I was saying, but also could just be a nice person and have a chat with. If it was just about anything random, that was fine with me.
Yeah, and you mentioned the key point there that not everyone will want to talk. So, and you mentioned before as well about rapport. So from a student's perspective, how important is it for you that you feel comfortable enough so that if you want to talk, you can, but if you don't want to talk, you don't have to? You know, you're not under any pressure to behave a certain way. How important is it that as instructors, we make you feel that comfortable?
I think that's so key to the learning journey. Everybody learns in their own way. And if, as an instructor, you've got a preconceived idea of how you're going to do this for every single person, you're going to come up against so many students that just aren't going to fit that mold, and you're going to really struggle. I would assume, obviously it's my opinion, I would assume that you would really struggle to teach a large percentage of people, because not everybody wants to have that same level of conversation. But I think for me, it was just really beneficial from start to finish that I felt whatever it was that I could talk to you about was there. And that was pretty much there from the first lesson. Like, you were quite, I suppose the word vulnerable feels a bit weird to say that about your driving instructor, but you told me about yourself and things that you were interested in, and I felt that I could do the same. So things like that you were vegan, like that can sometimes for some reason be a controversial, which is mental to me. And so I could chat to you about that, because at the time I was transitioning to being more vegetarian. So it was nice to kind of have that, and just be able to be open with someone that you're spending a lot of time with is really important in life and when learning, I guess.
Yeah, cool. And yeah, it does still puzzle me why people get offended when I say that I'm vegan. So I'm not making you be vegan. I'm just saying I don't eat cows. It's fine. You don't have. You can eat the cow. I'm not gonna. But yeah, I want to rewind right back to when you first started lessons, or even before you started lessons. What can you remember? What your concerns were, or maybe worries were about learning to drive?
Yeah, so I think right back before I started learning to drive when I was 17, my concern was I need to pass as quickly as possible because I want to drive before all my friends can drive, which is probably quite relatable for a lot of people around that age. But I just remember there were so many people like, oh, I learned to drive in 100 hours. I learned to drive in 60 hours. And my brother is someone who did actually learn in about 5 hours, which he's just really naturally gifted at it for some reason. So I'd already built up in my head that I need to do this and I need to do it quickly. And I don't know why I was in such a rush. Clearly I wasn't, because I then chose a holiday over driving. But when I came back to it a second time, my concerns were more around the actual logistics of driving. I didn't really know when I needed to change gear. I didn't really know how to do a hill start. And I built up this fear of going downhill towards a junction because my previous instructor let me fly through one, and it was a very scary experience. So yeah, I kind of, in my head, it shifted a lot from when I first wanted to learn to drive, which was I need to do this as quickly as possible, to when I came to learn to drive, the time that actually passed was more, I want to be a good driver, and how do I do that and feel safe when driving?
That's music to the ears of most driving instructors, is that? But I mean, just on that, a couple of things I want to touch on there, and I don't want to dwell on this just in case your previous instructor is listening. Hello, if he is. But you mentioned about kind of being like run through a junction there, and how important is it for you, and I suppose it would be applied to most students, to feel safe, to feel like your instructor's got your back and isn't going to let you do anything completely disastrous?
Yeah, I suppose like this is sort of the golden thread through the whole episode, but the communication that I had with my first instructor probably wasn't the best. Mostly on me part, I was rushing. I wanted to do this as quickly as possible. So I was just up for being pushed to the maximum of my ability every single lesson. But my instructor also didn't pick up on the fact when we had taken things too far. Not too far in the sense of dangerous, I'm sure it was always safe. But some lessons, when you're doing a lot of things at once, your brain reaches a capacity that it can't take in anymore. That's it. And I sort of, with that particular lesson, I'd reached that point where I was like, okay, I'm done now. I can't take in any more information. I just want to drive back. Like, I'm done. And my instructor hadn't picked up on that. I didn't communicate it. We came to a junction that then felt unsafe, and I didn't feel in control of the car. And that then built up this fear that lasted pretty much 4 years until I came to drive again. Less than that, but yeah, it wasn't ideal.
Well, no, but it was still there, and I think that as instructors, I know I'm guilty of this sometimes. It's easy to underestimate the way something like that might impact someone that's learning to drive, because, to me, that might be an everyday occurrence where a student tries to kill me. But to you, it isn't as a learner. So it's an element of sort of almost PTSD, because I can remember on our first lesson asking you, what concerns have you got around driving? And you telling me that. I can remember that story. And you're telling it now. So it's clearly, stuck in your brain. So I do think it's important that as instructors, and I include myself in this, we try to remember that stuff as well as you. But you mentioned some of your other concerns around sort of learning to drive that. And I appreciate that everyone's concerns are going to be different. But how important do you think it is, from your perspective, that those concerns are actually discussed either before the lesson or maybe even on the first lesson?
Yeah, I think having had that discussion prior to learning to drive, I think we were in the car at my very first lesson when we first had that conversation. And that was really great, because it meant that when we came to actually conquering those things, if you like, you could be more hands-on with it. It was more beneficial for you to talk me through exactly what we're doing, when and how, rather than sort of letting me figure it out, because you knew that this was already a problem in my mind. So if you left it to me to figure it out, which sometimes was great, for some of the things I learned to do, that was the best approach. But for others, I needed that more like hand-holding, if you like. Yeah. Not that you should hold your students' hands, that'd be super weird, but metaphorically.
No, there was no actual hand-holding. Anyone listening, there was no actual hand-holding, metaphorical hand-holding only. but yeah, no, I think you're right. But again, that's just my perspective. I think I want to ask you another question around instructors. Now, I appreciate this might be tricky for you to answer, but I'd be intrigued by your answer. And I will take it personally as well, just so you're aware. What advice would you offer to driving instructors that will listen? Now, I know that can be very broad and very general, but what advice would you offer to driving instructors?
I think it goes back to the very first conversation you have with that student when it's booking in the lessons. Try and get to know what it is they want from driving. Like, are they driving because they're a mum who needs to do the school run? Are they someone who's learning to drive because they want to commute to work, which is an hour away? Because those are two different types of driving. City centre driving versus round the town driving is completely different. One is obviously more of a priority for someone than something else. I guess talk about how you're going to structure private driving, if that is an option that student has. So Terry and I would discuss what I'd been working on and what I was going to work on. If you don't even know that a student is going to be doing that, it leaves you a little bit blindsided when they come to the lesson 4 weeks later and say, oh, I don't need to do this anymore, I've done it in my own car. That's a pretty difficult conversation to have at that point. And also, I think Terry's got a lot of values that he really stands for. And when you work with someone as a student, professionally, whatever that relationship is, your values need to align. If you have that first lesson with a student and you think, I don't agree with the way they've spoken to me, the things they're telling me they want, that's okay. Tell them that. It's okay to say no to a client or potential business deal because you don't feel your values aligned. And that kind of works both ways as well. If you're a student and you don't like the instructor, not on a personal level, professional level, it's okay. That's fine.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I think I want to touch back on the first thing you said there about that, the communication before the lesson, because for me personally, that's how I decide if I want to teach someone or not. Because I want those texts, because it's not normally a phone call, it's normally messages. I want those messages swapped so I can, as you've said, learn why you want to drive and learn what your worries are and get a feel for you, because that's how I filter out who I work with. Because I don't want to spend 40, 50, 60 hours in a car with someone who I dislike. I don't necessarily have to like them, but I need to enjoy delivering that lesson. And the same would apply, obviously, for you as a learner. So I think just on that, actually, because on my first lessons, and I don't think I've ever asked you this, so I may not like the answer, but on my first lesson, I tend to have quite an in-depth chat with students around the concerns around lessons going forward and how I work and how I structure them. I don't know if you can recall that first lesson, but is that something that you were happy having that conversation, or were you just kind of rolling your eyes, getting bored, or did you appreciate that openness and honesty?
No, I really appreciated that. Coming up to my first lesson, I went to an Aldi car park and practiced a bit of just pulling off so that I didn't feel I was starting from square one again, because I had some previous lessons. I got a parking ticket for that, so I don't recommend. Aldi is not the place to go and practice that. But I was able to tell you all the things I'd been up to sort of in my previous lessons the week before, which was getting a parking ticket. And it meant that going forwards, we had more of a structure. Not that you always need this is the 4 things we're going to do today, but it meant that you kind of knew how my brain worked, because I'm much more critical of myself than maybe some people are. I'm really organised, and it was important for me that same structure was true in the lessons. So I didn't mind having that chat. It didn't feel like a waste of money, a waste of time. It felt that we'd had that initial chat, so the lessons going forwards were more productive as a result.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'll keep doing it then. But thinking back to the lessons, at the end of the lesson, I always, and I still do, but ask for feedback. I will generally say to you guys, is there anything I could have done better for you today? Anything that would have made your lesson more enjoyable or more productive or anything like that? So when someone that you're paying to, whether it's teacher or driver, whatever the skill may be, says that to you at the end of a lesson and says it sincerely, how does that sort of make you feel? What impact does that have on you?
I think firstly, it reminds me as a student that my time is valued, and that I'm not just, paying the bills. Like an instructor that actually cares about what they're doing is great. If you're passionate about what you're doing, that is always a better position to be in. Even if you're in a low period, I know passion is really hard to stick with, but if you continuously show kindness to people, they'll show it back. So when you ask people sincerely for feedback, you might get an answer that you don't love, but ultimately it makes you a better person, and it makes your relationship with that person better going forward. So I think even if it is a concern, and sometimes it's difficult to have, I guess it's more confrontational when you're in a car together and someone asks you that, but I suppose if your students know they can message you afterwards and they say, oh, no, everything was fine, and they go away and reflect for an hour and think, actually, really didn't like this part of the lesson. If they can then message you and tell you that, next time, okay, I'm not going to do it like that, we'll do it a different way. Rather than not knowing your student doesn't like that, every week you go out and do the same roundabout because you think your student loves it there. And actually they're thinking, I hate this roundabout, I don't want to do this. That's a really niche example, but it applies to lots of situations that if you know there's a problem, you can deal with it. If you don't know it's there, it can be a problem.
Although I think you knew, and I think all my students know, that if you tell me you don't like something, we're going to do it more. That's kind of the rule. Look, I've tried really hard to stay away from anything remotely self-indulgent during this conversation, but I feel like I need to mention this because you actually brought it up before we started recording, and I think it's really relevant because just before we started recording, you reminded me of this, and I realized I'd stopped doing it. But it was a little phrase I have at the end of every lesson where I'd finish, and I'd say, okay, any questions, concerns, issues, worries, troubles, or problems? And that was kind of my little sign off phrase. And I just found it, I'd not really considered it, but you mentioned it. And I'm like, oh, you remember that? It's weird, the little things that stick with you. So yeah, maybe anyone listening, get a sign off phrase. I still need to get one for the Instructor podcast. The other thing I wanted to ask you here was, and I'm going to be careful how I phrase this one, but at the minute there are awards. It's the award season for driving instructors, and there's 2 main ones: Intelligent Instructor and Go Roadie. And if anyone wants to vote for the Instructor podcast, feel free. You know where to find them. But one of the comments that I see a lot online around award season is that we shouldn't be messaging our students or asking students to vote for us. Now, I messaged you because I no longer teach you because you don't need me because you passed your driving test with flying colours. But I messaged you, and the message was something along the lines of, hi, Charlotte, hope you're well. I've been nominated, or whatever, I forget the exact wording, but here's a link for the Intelligent Instructor Awards. If you think I had a positive impact, feel free to vote, but please don't feel obliged. It was something like that, sort of a message. How much did that annoy you? Me texting you that? How, do you wish I hadn't done it? Did it not bother you?
Yeah, so I actually work in digital marketing. So I kind of have 2 brains to apply to this. I've got my student perspective and then my professional marketer perspective, if you like. From a student perspective, I'm on my phone all the time. Most people my age group are. You see one message out of 100 you click it and open it. If you want to interact with it, you do. Otherwise, you don't reply. People ghosting Generation Z, my generation, is so normal. Don't reply. Like, it's not going to weigh heavily on my mind that, I didn't reply to that person. I just thought, okay, I didn't reply. That for me isn't a problem. As a marketer, think about all the emails you receive from brands asking you to do something, buy something, sign up to something, subscribe to something. Chances are in 24 hours time, you can't name 3 emails from 3 brands that you got the day before. You've not left a lasting enough impression with a single message that forevermore your student is going to think, wow, that was really annoying. I never want to interact with that company, brand, driving instructor again. And I would even go as far to say that Terry sent me that initial message and it was a good time for me to do that. I did fill the form out. I was happy to do it. But I could have quite easily forgotten about it if Terry had sent me another message in a week's time and said, hey, I'm still really like to win this. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on it. And had messaged me again with a link. I wouldn't have found that annoying either from a marketing perspective and a student perspective, because I was in the gym when I got that message and I could have just as easily been driving. I could have been cooking dinner. Like, there's so many things that could have been happening that meant that at that moment I opened the message. So for me, I've opened it, I've read it. It goes away from my notifications, but I've not actioned it. I would not find it annoying. And also, word of mouth is your strongest form of marketing. So if you can remind students to think about their lessons with you, that's only a positive thing.
Cool. So anyone listening, don't be afraid to ask your students. And I would also just chuck in there that we all, even me, and I generally, like I said before, I work with students that I don't work with people that I don't enjoy being in a car with, but even me, I'll get the odd troublesome student, should I say. Maybe don't send it to them, but I think on the whole, I think I would agree with you. Okay, cool. Is there anything else that you would like to touch on and maybe suggest to instructors or anything like that before I let you disappear?
Nothing major springs to mind. I think a big thing that is, like we've just talked about so much, is that communication skill. You're not just teaching someone to drive, you're building a relationship with that person that could go on for over a year. If in that first lesson it doesn't feel right, you don't get on well, if you don't put that initial work in to build a relationship, the next year of your life could be quite miserable for 2 hours or whatever it is you end up doing. So just take a little bit of time, know that every student is going to be different, and what works for one person doesn't always work for another, but that's okay. You can only try with people. You can never be too nice or too kind is my general motto. So you might as well be a good person.
You might as well be a good person. There's the quote I'm taking from this show. But I am going to ask you one more question, actually, because I was very interested in what you said there about stuff won't always work for everyone. Because I will experiment a bit on lessons sometimes. I think, oh, let's try this or let's try this. So if I can't remember if we did, but if on a driving lesson I said, oh, let's try this idea that I've got today, and you were happy to try it, but it didn't work, would that bother you? Or would you take that as oh, well, we tried that, it didn't work, let's do it again?
Yeah, I'd completely take that as, okay, we tried it didn't work. I think there's plenty of lessons where we were moving up to try new things, and there's different ways of teaching. Terry's got so many car toys and whiteboards and notebooks and flashcards and everything in your car that there's going to be a way that works for everyone, but you have to find that. For me, I loved your artistic drawings. They were but for some people, they don't want to pull over at the side of the road and watch you draw a roundabout. They just want to go and do the roundabout. But if you don't experiment, you're not going to know that. And for most students, I would assume, don't know how they want to learn to drive because they've never done it before. So they're as much learning how to learn as you are learning how to teach. So
I'm just touched that you said it was artistic drawings, and I don't think there's a better note to finish on. But so I want to thank you for your time again. Your second appearance on the podcast. I want to try and find a way to get you on again, just so we can make it a trilogy. But big thank you for joining us, Charlotte. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
In fact, do you want to tell everyone where they can go and follow your guinea pigs on Instagram?
Yeah, sorry if you've heard them squeaking away. We're filming this in the evening and they've not been fed. They've got their own Instagram account. It's just at the guinea pig lady. If you want to give them a follow. But then you can find me on LinkedIn. If you search Charlotte Parker Marketing, I'll come up.
Awesome. Again, thank you for your time today. It's appreciated.
No worries.
And we'll be back in just a moment with the next interview with Julia Feeric. But just before we do, I'm just taking a slight pause in the show to give a shout out to our latest sign up to the Instructor Podcast Premium, David Owen. Now, David has recently signed up and he has got access to nearly 80 exclusive shows already over in that premium content bank. And he's got access to the 2 or 3 minimum shows that we put out every month, including the most recent one, which is Bob Morton. We do an exclusive podcast every month called Being Better with Bob Morton. And this recent one, we answered a question from one of the premium members talking about troublesome students. And Bob also gave some excellent advice around judgmental language, how that can affect lessons and standard checks. But as I said, there's nearly 80 exclusive shows over there covering everything from standard checks to coaching to building a better business. Loads of awesome stuff over there. But it's not just content. We also have some exclusive discounts for you. So if you sign up to the premium content for £10 a month, you will get a £10 discount off Bob Mort's clients that are learning. You will also get discounts from places like the ADI Doctor, the Guild of Mindful Drivers, Go Roadie, and Coach of the Geeks Turbo. So loads of discounts available over there as well. And we've already got some more exclusive stuff lined up to kick off in January. So now is the perfect time to sign up. And I say it's only £10 a month for all the content tier. And if you sign up and you don't like it, tell me. And you can leave and you'll pay your £10 and then you can get all the content for a month and then you never have to come back and listen again. But that's unlikely to happen because everyone that signs up seems to love it and always comes back for more. So yeah, best place to find that. You can either find the link in the show notes or head over to www.theinstructorpodcast.com. Over there, head to the premium section. You can have a look at some of the exclusive shows we've got over there. And you can find links to sign up. So again, for £10 a month, you get all that awesome stuff. But for now, let's dive back into the show. And we're now joined by former student of mine, an all-round amazing human being, Julia Feeric. How are we doing, Julia?
Hi, fantastic. Yeah, thanks.
No, it's great to have you on because when I was kind of muting about getting this show done, the Pupil's Perspective show, a few of my listeners over in my premium content had heard you on Driving Test Tales and they requested you to come on. So you are a specially requested guest.
Wow. I feel very honoured.
Yeah. You're working your way through all my podcasts, which is never a good thing. But this show, this episode is about the pupil's perspective. It's about how you found learning to drive and maybe what advice you would offer to instructors and you know, that side of it. So I think the first question I want to ask you is how you found the overall experience of learning to drive.
So overall, honestly, I loved it. I was very nervous about it to begin with, but I think driving lessons became like the highlight of my week. And I'd always look forward to them. If you know, an extra slot came available, I was always really excited that I had one a bit sooner than I thought. And yeah, just like making that kind of progress, I think it's great because every lesson you do feel like you're moving forward. And it's one of those things where just a few hours makes a massive difference. And you can really see yourself getting better. I like that about it.
I want to dive straight into that. Why was it the highlight of your week? What did you enjoy so much? I mean, obviously, you know, I make everyone's highlight of the week, but what was it about?
Yeah, the company.
Yeah.
I think the progress part of it, and I think as you're growing up, so I learned to drive when I was 20, and by then I already knew quite a few people who had learned, and so there's this big anticipation of when you turn old enough and when are you going to learn to drive, and it finally come to the time where it was my summer. That was my time. That was my opportunity. And yeah, it just felt like the start of a new stage of getting that kind of independence and reaching that, I guess, extra level of maturity.
Yeah. And the other thing you mentioned there was about like being offered an extra slot. And that was one of the things I wanted to speak to you about in particular was the interaction we had. So as a student, as someone that's learning to drive, what was it like that, like when you get a message from me saying, oh, can we do an extra lesson? Or this is what I've got available this week. Do you want anything extra? Did you feel like you were being pestered, or did you feel that it was just good communication?
No, not pestered at all. Honestly, I think like the communication aspect is really important, because at the end of the day, you're both reliant on each other. The instructor, obviously needs the person who's learning to be on board, on the same page, to have everything coordinated so that everything runs smoothly. And then obviously the learner relies on their instructor. And so I think it definitely has to be like a two-way process of, not just the learner going out and being like, oh, I really want more lessons, or I hello, excuse me, can I do this? Can I do that? I think it has to be both of you. And I think getting those kinds of extra offers, I think really makes the learner feel part of the entire plan. Yeah. And like they're being, I guess, just treated, I suppose, as an equal, as like like the cooperation's there.
Yeah. And I think that's a big part of it. It is an equal relationship. There may be things that I know that you don't, that I can teach you, but I always learn from you guys as well. So I think that you phrasing it like that as a sort of an equal, I think is key. But I mean, just in terms of that communication, that's something that I thought that came across really well from you as well. If I go right back to when you first started, I can remember you messaging me and basically asking to start lessons, and I had no room. I couldn't take anyone else on. I can remember saying to you, I will find room, simply because of the first message you sent me, because you sent me this quite a long message telling me about where you're at, why you're learning to drive, your availability, you kind of whole thing about this is someone that I want to work with. So I can remember before we even had this first lesson, we swapped quite a lot of messages. How important to you is that initial communication, that initial interaction?
I think to me it was key. I think by the fact that my very first message, I didn't want it to be, one of those preset Facebook ones of what's your availability, or just the ones that you click on and it automatically sends. I wanted something that was a bit more personal, a bit more about me, because at the end of the day, it's a two-way choice. The learner has to choose the instructor, but the instructor also has to choose the learner, sometimes. So yeah, I think the communication was key, and just making sure, my potential instructors knew where I was coming from, knew what I was looking for. So yeah, I think it's really important to get that kind of communication right nice and early.
I definitely agree with that. I think that communication is key. And like I said, because you laid that sort of openness and honesty to me, I was able to be honest back and say, look, I don't know when I'll be able to fit you in, but I'll see what I can do. So in terms of me being honest with you and saying, I don't know if I can, but I'll try my best, and not necessarily committing to anything, how much did that sort of honesty back, how valuable was that to you?
Honestly, it meant a lot, because especially that summer when I was starting to learn to drive, or wanting to learn to drive, I realized quite quickly that it was going to be quite hard to find an instructor. Instructors were in really high demand. It was just after COVID. So all of a sudden things were open, lessons were able to be run. And so it was going to be a difficult process. And some of the messages I received back from other instructors were just, sorry, no spaces. Whereas Terry, actually, you had the time and you put in the effort to, give a bit of a longer reply. And I think something I really valued was when you offered me like the links to learning resources, some yours and some not even related to you, just websites, other things that I could look at, so that even if we didn't go ahead with any lessons together, it still felt like you really wanted to facilitate my journey in learning, even if it wasn't going to be with you. I really appreciated that.
And I think the last thing I want to ask around that is that one of the things that I really believe in is that I only want to work with people that I want to work with. I don't want to be stuck in a car for 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever it is, with someone that I don't enjoy teaching or working with. So because of that, I value that interaction. So From your perspective, do you think that communication helps the student find the right instructor and vice versa?
Oh yeah, 100%. Because the way that I went about it, then I did contact a few instructors myself. I went on a trial lesson with a different instructor, planned one with a different one. And so it was like at one point, I think there were 3 potential instructors I could have gone with. And at the end of the day, the skills being taught were all going to be of a high standard, and everyone was a good instructor. It was just the kind of connection and relationship building aspect that I think I then decided to focus on. At the end of the day, you're all qualified to teach, and you're all going to be great. It's just about finding that person who, again, you want to spend that time learning with, the person who you think will bring out the best in you, the person who will make you look forward to those lessons, rather than just have a more transactional relationship of teach and off you go, no relation, like no communication, no talking, nothing between the lessons, just here you are, here's 2 hours, these are the skills, off you go again.
Yeah.
And that's not something I was looking for. So for me, it was important.
I think that was something else I wanted to ask you about, because as you mentioned there, you did have lessons with another instructor and at least one instructor. And I was aware of that. And again, we go back to that communication side. You told me quite honestly, you said, I want to pay for my first lesson. My memory is quite good for stuff like this. I want to pay for my first lesson just by itself, because I'm going to have lessons with someone else as well. And then I'll decide who I go with, and then, pay for like a block of lessons. So I simply took that as exactly like you've just described, which is, well, I want to see who's right for me. But I do sometimes read online from other instructors that they would perhaps take offense at that. They don't want to share students or whatever. But from your perspective, do you believe that an instructor should take offense, or do you think that really is just you trying to find the right person for you?
Yeah, I think definitely no offense meant by it, and I don't think any offense should be taken, because, as I said, I just wanted to find someone who I thought suited me as an individual, who had the other skills, just the general, I suppose, connection with me, so that I'd get the most out of the lessons, and that the instructor would also, I suppose, enjoy them too. So definitely no offense meant, I think. And again, I think communicating it all, making sure everyone's, that no one's taken aback, no one's surprised if, a student suddenly stops replying. I mean, that would be worst case scenario. Definitely wouldn't do that. But and I think as well, I much prefer to get it right first time early on, rather than commit to, let's say, 10 hours, do the 10 hours, not really enjoy them, prolong them, because let's say I'm not enjoying them, so I'd probably want to space the lessons apart, rather than have 10 hours a week with someone who I just don't feel like I click with. And then that would just make the whole experience quite negative for both parties involved. And so I wanted to just get it right, see the 2 hours, use that as an indication, instead of trying out 10, 15 hours and then switching, and then potentially not making the progress I could have made.
Yeah. I mean, I've had it the opposite round as well, where admittedly not many, but I've had 1 or 2 people that have come to me, and after that first lesson or first couple of lessons, they've gone elsewhere because I've not been right for them. And I've had it as well where I have said to a student, I don't think I'm the right instructor for you, for whatever reason. How would you have taken that, do you think? Obviously been massively disappointed, because I'm an amazing human being, as we discussed earlier, but if I'd have said to you, I'm sorry, Julia, I don't think I'm right for you because of X, Y, and Z, would you have taken that as like a personal insult? Would you have taken that, well, clearly we're not right for each other, I'm going to move on?
Yeah, I think it's obviously a difficult situation. I think as well, a lot of us try and avoid confrontation. Things like that often feel quite awkward. But again, it's a big commitment to make, a big time commitment. You get quite involved. And so I think it is important to always respect each other's opinions about it. And since it's a two-way exchange, then definitely as a student, if your instructor did turn around to you and say that, then it would probably be difficult to hear, of course. But yeah, I think it's just something you've got to roll with and move on with, and realize that it's probably also the best for you. The instructor has taught many people before you, so they probably know what's right.
Yeah. The other thing you mentioned just a little bit earlier that I wanted to touch back on was you mentioned about the resource. I can't say it, the resources that I sent you. So there were things like the app that I use where you can book your lessons, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There was Feeric Pro. I think I sent you my podcasts, and I sent you some other stuff that wasn't mine either, but there were, links or stuff. So not all just my stuff. How important to you was that? Even if you didn't use it all, but to have the feeling that, oh, I've got this app where I can see where my lessons are, I can see where my payments are, and I've got all this other stuff. How did that make you as a learner feel?
Yeah, honestly, it just makes you feel very involved. Makes you feel like you've got more of a say, and more ownership over your own lessons and more input into it all. It's also, I think, good to do things behind the scenes when you're not in a car, when you're not, during the lesson practicing, whatever. Just knowing that you do have options to keep making progress, even if, for example, there is a busy time and you can't quite make schedules fit, then during times like that, knowing that you do have resources to go to, I think is really reassuring.
Do you think that, again, I appreciate this is just your opinion and everyone's different, but do you think that's something that most, if not all, instructors should be offering, so that they can just say, look, here's some stuff you can do this between lessons?
Yeah, honestly, I think even if instructors don't have their own resources that they've created, I think, directing students to resources that have been created by other people is honestly just as valuable. I think, I don't know, like support other creators, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Definitely. And things like the apps, definitely a good thing to have.
Yeah, I mean, I would second that, because I'm not brilliant at creating videos, but there are lots of people that are. So I don't need to go and make videos. I can send you links to theirs. I'm better at the audio stuff. Face for radio, you might say. But I also just wanted to touch a little bit on the theory, just while we'll mention the resources there, because, again, that was something where the communication came into it, because I've always said to my students, I'll very, very probably said it to you, that you can message me anytime you want. You can message me at 3 in the morning, just don't expect a reply back. And if I haven't replied back within a couple of days, feel free to chase me up. And I can remember you doing your theory and having a really good approach to that, because you would be sending me screenshots of questions and stuff like that. And there was some where I could text you an answer. There was some where I might have to send you a voice note. And then there were others where we went through it in the car because it was more complicated. So again, if we're talking about the communication, how was that communication around the theory for you? How important was that?
I think to me it was really important. I suppose like getting the answers was great, but having someone to explain them to you who actually knows you as a driver, I think that was really valuable, because sometimes these apps do refer you back to the what's it called, the driving code. and you get the official paperwork on it. It tells you the answers. You could just learn it, I suppose, just memorize it. But I think what's always better is knowing that you can go to your instructor, ask the question, and they can relate it back to, for example, routes that you've been on together, or when you're actually on the drive, pointing out, oh, this is the kind of sign that you saw in your questions that you were confused about. These are the road markings. This is how the road markings change. And that's not something you can just get from Googling it. I think that's a great place where your instructor can come in and actually talk to you about it.
So, I mean, from my experience as an instructor, not every student wants help with the theory. A lot of them don't have the same attitude towards the theory that you did. They've not always got the best attitude. But how important do you think it is, as instructors, we provide that option so that we are willing to talk to you about it, we are willing to help you?
No, I honestly, I think it's crucial. I think it's obviously a lot nicer for the student to know that if they can pass the theory test first time, if they feel like they're making faster progress with it thanks to help, I think that's always really good. Something else I wanted to mention that I remember you doing is posting on social media like a little challenge for the day or for the week about the driving theory tests of, can you beat my score? And I think that kind of like friendly competition, I think that was really good. I think that was really encouraging, and I suppose reminding students that it is still a thing, and you do still have to keep on top of it.
It was it's annoying because I hadn't done that for a little while actually, but I used to do a mock theory test every Friday, and as you said, post a score up and say, "Can you beat it?" And I always got 49 because by the time I got to the test, I was bored and I wanted it over with, and I just rushed through questions. There were always one or two I got wrong because I wasn't paying attention, and that's how you fail your theory test by not paying attention and rushing it. But you didn't. You passed first time and got annoyed with yourself because you only finished in the top 5% in the UK rather than the top 1% or whatever it was. But I did want to speak to you a little bit as well about the communication in lessons, in the sense of you were very, very nervous learning to drive. I think, was it, "Oh God," was your favourite phrase? When I would say we're going to take the next left, and "Oh God," or "There's a man 7 miles down the road," "Oh God." But you would often come to lessons with almost like a new worry, a new concern. And you would want to get that out of your system at the start of the lesson. Whether that was a 2-minute conversation or a 20-minute conversation, you would have like I say, almost a new concern and feel like you just need to vent, get out of your system, and then would go and have an awesome lesson. So being able to have that option at the start of a lesson to talk about your concern or get it off your chest, how important was that to you?
Yeah, so as you said, I was a very nervous beginner, and I would often come to the lesson thinking, I started overthinking this thing, or when I was in the car and someone else was driving, I saw them doing so and so, and I just thought, oh my God, I wouldn't have known what to do. And so having that time, I think, definitely got my confidence up. And I think there's such like a mental aspect to driving, and that if you're not in the right mindset, then it's just not going to go well. And I think I do actually remember one lesson when we got to the top of a hill, going to do a hill start, and I just remember not really feeling it. I think I needed a few minutes to just compose myself. Then we set off, went down this horrible one-way street or something. It was awful. It was really windy, loads of parked cars. And then I think, Terry, you noticed that I was just not really with it. I was a little bit too anxious about it. And so I remember we stopped, got out of the car, took a few deep breaths, spoke about it, just had a conversation. What was it on my mind? What was that mental block for me? Because physically, I could do it. I could change gears when I needed to. I knew, when to press the clutch. But for some reason, it just wasn't adding up because the mental part wasn't quite right. And so having those conversations, both at the start of the lessons and even sometimes in the middle, and then I remember we always did a recap at the end as well, just a conversation about what we've achieved that lesson, what we've done that day, and what I want to take away from it. I think just having those constant conversations in between the actual bits of driving, I thought was fantastic. Honestly, I think it was one of the best things that could have been done, knowing that there's more than just driving non-stop.
I think the key takeaway from there for me is that it was never mandated. There would be times when we'd pull up, when we might pull up for 30 seconds. There were times we'd pull up, and I said you might pull up for 20 minutes, but it was what you needed at the time. So I used to be quite nervous about stuff like that when I first started, in that, oh God, if I speak to the student now, are they just going to think I'm wasting the time and wasting their money? And I was always scared. But I found quite quick that if I just do it as appropriate for the student, as you just said, it works. So would you just advise instructors to test that water a little bit and see what works for each student?
Yeah, honestly, I would. And I'd definitely say to not be scared of pulling over for a little bit longer to have those conversations, and, to have that kind of mental reset sometimes if a student needs it. Yeah, because I suppose it is sometimes quite scary from both parties. Sometimes as a student, when you are, not on the go for a while in a lesson, then you might start thinking, oh, why aren't we driving? But honestly, I think sometimes with the mental blockades, the best way to make the progress in the practical side is to stop, slow down, talk about something, And yeah, that's entirely based off the student. And yeah, I suppose as an instructor, just being receptive to that as you get to know your student, reading the cues, getting to know whether the oh God, as I used to say, is actually, anything to be worried about. Is it a reason to stop? Is it a reason to have that reset, or are they just being dramatic?
Yeah, I think there was the odd dramatic occasion.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other thing I want to touch on with you is private practice, because there is a big campaign at the minute from the DVSA to encourage, where possible, private practice. And the other student I had on this episode, Charlotte, she had an awful lot of private practice. She had her own car. She was out with a partner quite a lot, driving all over the place. Whereas you, on the other side, had none. And the way you learned to drive was, I don't necessarily want to say unique, but definitely not overly common. And we kind of had a big block of lessons over a few weeks. Then you disappeared off to Poland for a month, and then you came back and had another block of lessons for 3 weeks, and you disappeared to Cambridge for a few months. Then you come back, another block of lessons, and you test. So I know you can't necessarily make a direct comparison because you've nothing to compare it to, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on private practice. Do you think that not having private practice hampered you? Do you think it benefited you? What was the impact there, do you think?
Yeah, so honestly, again, this is probably something that did add to my anxiety because of the big push to do, private learning. And yeah, I think it definitely made me quite worried. I thought that I'll definitely be disadvantaged, that something else I was worried about is that I'll end up spending, I suppose, a lot more money and time in paid lessons because I don't have the private practice. I kind of thought, well, am I going to have to do the number of hours of private practice as a lesson instead? I was quite worried about it. But honestly, in the end, I think it all turned out pretty fine. Yeah, I had certain periods where I wouldn't drive a car at all for 2 months. And then I'd come back, get a few lessons, again, not do any practice at home because it just wasn't feasible. My parents only had an automatic car, and I thought it was really valuable to learn on a manual. I didn't want to get confused. And again, so I think that for me, there was a moment of debating whether it's worth getting insured on an automatic car, even though I'm learning on a manual. And I think that, again, was something that I needed to decide whether I wanted to do, of balancing switching, the method of driving in order to just get those hours on the road in. I wasn't quite sure what to do. In the end, I just decided to not get any of the private practice in. I felt like we were making good enough progress. I think at one point, Terry advised me to do some visualization. So in the times that I can't, drive, or, when I'm not around to get lessons, to just sit, close my eyes and imagine that I'm driving. So I did that a few times. And honestly, I think that helped too. I think it really was quite a reasonable suggestion in the end.
It sounds woo-woo, but it works. That's all I can say.
Yeah, so I think there's probably a much bigger, I guess, like a bigger fuss about private lessons in what people imagine than in actual fact there is. I think in actual fact they, I'm sure they help, but I've also heard of people learning quite bad habits from non-instructor instructors. Yeah, so honestly, I think there are definitely some pros and cons, and in the end, I was completely fine without any.
Do you think that, much like a lot about what we've spoken today, do you think it comes down to the individual?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, sometimes obviously it's not down to the individual, whether they just have access or not. But I think definitely not building it up as a massive barrier if that person doesn't have that kind of opportunity to get any private practice in.
Yeah, I think, again, with the things you mentioned there, that falls into that communication bracket. You mentioned about going to Poland and going to Cambridge and whatnot. It was like I knew that from our first few messages we sent, so I was able to plan that into my lessons. And because we'd had that open discussion, and you asked me about the private practice side, I think I can remember my advice, which was do what's right for you. You know you an awful lot better than I know you. if you think private practice will work, do it. And in the end, you decided, as you said, because it was automatic, that's going to cloud your mind a bit too much. But yeah, I think it does come down to individual. The other thing that comes down to individual, and I asked this same question to Charlotte, so I'm going to be intrigued to see if your answer is the same or different. But the Driving Instructor Awards, there are some around this time every year. And I see lots of different comments from instructors about them on different Facebook groups. One of the common ones is about the sort of the Instructor of the Year award, where you have to kind of message your students and say, look, I've been nominated for this, you can vote for me here. How annoying is it for you that when I message you randomly out of the blue and say, if I've had a positive impact on your driving, here's a link, you can go and vote for me here, but don't feel obliged. How annoying is that on a scale? How annoying is that?
Honestly, not annoying at all. I really think a massive benefit of learning to drive is making that connection with your driving instructor. And I think given the number of hours you spend in the car together, given the fact that your lives are literally in each other's hands or feet, then it's to me it would be weird to completely lose contact with your driving instructor after you've passed, especially since driving isn't just up to the driving test, it continues after. And so I think definitely keeping in touch with your instructor is great, and hearing about things like the driving instructor awards, again, I wouldn't have been able to hear about that otherwise. Maybe it's something I would have known about if I was a current student, and just because I'm a previous student doesn't mean I don't want to be involved in that now. Honestly, I was just glad to be able to be a part of it and be able to fill whatever I can fill out. At the end of the day, I think it's just good to celebrate people and celebrate achievements and celebrate people who have made positive impacts. So honestly, I think there's absolutely no shame in saying, oh, this is going on, if you'd like to take part as well, if you'd like to contribute to any voting. I just think it's great.
Not always so great when your student texts you back immediately and says, oh yeah, I've put these negative comments about you and said how you nearly killed us all the time. That's not always ideal. But I would also chuck in that I suppose when you're one of my learners, you also get messages saying, will you come and appear on a podcast with me? That then Driving Says Tales that then gets downloaded 28,000 times. Which one of them is worse? I'll let you decide. So kind of the final question I want to ask you is, what if you had a friend that was taking up driving lessons, what qualities would you ask them to look for in a driving instructor, do you think?
Yeah, so I think I'd tell them to find someone who makes sure that they're in the right mindset when they're driving. To get someone who, even if there doesn't need to be a word for it or a way to describe it, just someone who you can form a connection with, so that when you're in the car, the atmosphere is positive and it just feels right. I think that's why I wanted to try out some lessons instead of just trying to judge it straight away. Then just trying it out to see how it feels. And I think sometimes just knowing how it feels and how you feel while you're in the car, how you feel when you've left, how you feel imagining more lessons with that person, I think that's honestly a much better measure than any kind of adjectives, because every instructor is going to be different and every student's different, and so different people suit different instructors. And so honestly, I think just trusting your instinct, trusting how you feel after spending time with the person, I think is the best measure of it.
Awesome. Anything else you'd like to cover while you're on here? Any final words of advice for driving instructors, do you think?
Oh, yeah, I suppose have fun with it. It's always a lot nicer for both of you if the atmosphere is positive like that. See it as another relationship to build up, because it is of course like a working relationship, and both of you need to be involved in it. Both of you need to be on the same page about the driving, about the what you want to achieve each lesson. And so having that kind of communication and Yeah, I think that's everything.
Awesome. Well, I do appreciate you joining me today for this episode of the Instructor Podcast. So, yeah, thank you for your time. It's been awesome.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you for having me.
So, big thank you to both Charlotte and Julie there for joining me on this podcast. I know that as learners, to go and record on an instructor podcast, I can imagine that's a little bit daunting. So, I appreciated both of them joining me. I learned a lot. I hope you learned a lot as well. And as always welcome feedback. So, feel free to let me know what you think about the show. And speaking of what you think about the show, I like to read out some of my feedback that I get. And I'm going to read out the negative comments. This actually goes back to last week's episode with the coaching crowd. And I got a lovely comment on my post on Facebook from a chap called Michael Hollingberry, whose comment was, I found this interview a turn-off. Now, I'm not sure whether that means he didn't enjoy the interview or whether he was hoping to be aroused and then found it unarousing. I'm not sure which one of those he meant. I did ask him to clarify. I replied with, that's a shame. What could I have done better in your opinion? Unfortunately, he didn't then reply to that. So a bit of a negative comment about last week's episode. However, there were also some positive. So Phil Cowley said he loved the episode and instantly subscribed to the coaching crowd. Lee Jowett said, such a great episode. Loved the thoughts on the test. The DVSA want ADIs to create responsible drivers, but want ADIs to be 100% responsible for the decision-making regarding test rather than it being part of the process of learning and what could be learned about overconfidence or using the experience to help the pupil reevaluate their beliefs. Great job at facilitating the discussion as always. And Les Hopkinson said, great episode, Terry. Thanks for taking the time to speak to Zoe and Joe and get them to talk about coaching relating to our industry. So the positive clearly far outweighing the bad. And if you've got any feedback, you are welcome to leave it as a review on Apple or on Facebook or comments on my post. I will happily read out the negative and the positive. I quite enjoy doing this at the end of the shows. But yeah, just from me, just want to take a moment to thank you for listening today. It's a show that, like I said at the start, I did have a bit of a trouble formatting it in my brain, quite how I wanted it to go, but I really enjoyed the end of it, and I hope you guys did too. So I hope you guys have an awesome week, and I'll catch you soon.
The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.